Hey, everybody. How's it going? We're going to react to a crazy video that was made attempting to debunk the work of not just us, but a lot of very important people like Max Blumenthal and Jimmy Dore and others. We're going to have a lot of fun with it tonight. So welcome, everybody. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. We are definitely going to have some fun with this. I guess we'll just get our introduction video started.
Of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
All right. So welcome.
The American century.
Whoa. Welcome. We've got Peter Coffin here. We've got Fox of the Space Commune podcast. And we are reacting to a video by the illustrious, brilliantly profound Sophie from Mars. That's what we're here to do. And we've got some clips. We're definitely going to show some of the clips, blatant inaccuracies. It's really something special. Fox, do you want to start out with your initial reactions to this lengthy but poorly researched hit piece?
Yeah, I mean, it was, what a slog. 2 hours and 20 minutes. I don't think I've ever watched a YouTube video for that long. It was boring as hell. That was my first reaction. It was freaking boring as hell. But, you know, seriously, like my real reaction to it was like, the whole video itself is kind of like a conspiracy theory. It's like a meta conspiracy theory, which is like really funny. It's like you could apply all the accusations, you know, to Sophie herself. So that I found like the funniest irony about the whole thing. That plus all the misinformation, just blatant lies. It's really it's quite a piece. It's like The Room. It's like a beautiful disaster.
I don't know if I'd describe it as beautiful.
Yeah,
per se,
it's not as good as The Room.
And what was your reaction, Peter?
Well, I haven't actually been able to watch the entire thing. I have watched some of the intro and then a few clips throughout that various people have linked to me and said, hey, you got to see this part. And the thing that I've seen that's in common with all of these various parts, and I've seen probably more than 20 minutes of it at this point. That's the length of what I would say is a normal YouTube video. But I mean, it's not paced well, and it's full of stuff that it seems like wasn't thought about. Like like the first stretch of it is just her more or less reading Wikipedia, which is not really that like compelling of content. Like I've spent hours reading Wikipedia myself and I don't know. I don't think it's well put together. It certainly wasn't well researched. And every point that I've seen, especially the ones that seem to relate to smearing all of us personally, really managed to avoid addressing our arguments at all. And I don't know. It's exactly what I expect from a BreadTube video about Marxist-Leninists at this point, except very long.
Yeah. I mean, I watched it and I was watching and I thought, you know, Skippy the Bear, Thought Slime clearly put her up to this, right? I mean, that's pretty clear. She didn't think to do this on her own. And on some level, he's kind of condescendingly laughing at her because, like, if he really cared about her, he would encourage her to do a little bit better research. I mean, there are some just laughable factual, you know, inaccuracies in here. And we've got a lot of clips picked out, but I guess the first round of clips I wanted to show and we can react to, she does this throughout the video. We got like 3 really good examples of this. where she takes something that, you know, us, George Galloway, Jimmy Dore, Max Blumenthal argue and say is true. And then she just says, it's not true. It's a conspiracy theory. Believe me. And then proceeds to declare that we're all bad people for believing it. And she does not get into any of the evidence with any depth of why people believe this. And the reason is she can't refute any of it. It's just kind of like, just trust me. This fact, this piece of information, it fits a narrative that I don't like, and it would go against the mainstream. So therefore, it can't possibly be true. So just trust me on that. And that's very lazy. A lot of conspiracy debunking videos go into great detail about, you know, what people are saying. And there is a lot of bullshit, you know, it's like conspiracy theory on the internet. But, you know, we're saying things that are blatant documented fact. And her response isn't to debunk it in any way other than saying, oh, it can't possibly be true because I said so. So the first clip is actually her responding to the situation where, you know, it was proven that one of the top bread tubers, Abigail Thorne, is being funded by an outlet that is tied to the British government and the British foundations, as well as the US government that has put out disinformation about Syria, etc. And this is her debunking something that, you know, Max Blumenthal and Kit Klattenberg and others did great research documenting. They have an actual like smoking gun document proving this. And this is her response to it. So here we go.
Why do you look like side characters from Better Call Saul? Also, Kit, your Twitter bio could use some work, because I haven't seen any journalism so far, buddy. So the article, which at time of recording is still up, paints a connection between Philosophy Tube and the royal family by way of basically not understanding in the slightest way what the royal institution is, because they're desperate to prove that BreadTube are all controlled by sinister forces. The actual funding for the study, as Abby discusses in the video, came from George Soros's Open Society Foundation, so they really missed a great opportunity to tie Soros in as well, you know? Their links to a Syria PsyOps veteran are about as tenuous and nonsensical as you'd expect. Someone Abby works with on challenging pseudoscience is on a commission which is headed by someone called Peter Daszak, who was involved with the blah, blah, blah. How does anyone read this, honestly? The whole program would be sinister if the royal family actually had anything to do with it, and the people they say are involved are actually involved, and if you agree that vaccines are bad. So, you know, solid reporting there, guys.
So that's it, right? I mean, she starts.
How does
like,
anyone read this?
Yeah, like the facts and the actual document that was produced, and who cares about actual details and facts, right? You know,
I mean,
blah,
there's
blah,
so
blah.
many facts in here that I can't bother to read it. I'm sorry. I'm just going to have to move on to something tenuous.
Yes, but let's focus on the clothing that people are wearing, which is funny because Abigail Thorne is literally wearing a suit jacket in her video, which she just made fun of you guys
basically the same.
Yeah, I mean, it's like there are actual documents showing Abigail Thorne did get funding from a foundation that is tied to the U.S. government, tied to the British government, and tied to the foundation that the British royal family directs. But none of that matters. None of that matters. That's just, you know, blah, blah, blah. You know, because she said so, it doesn't matter. I mean, and it's just like, wait a second, like, these are facts. Like, and she does this all throughout the video. Do you have any more thoughts on that, or do we want to move to another?
I feel like the defense that, like, oh, it doesn't have anything to do with the royals, instead it has to do with George Soros, isn't really a particularly good defense either.
Yeah, how is that better? That's like work. I don't know how these people are all so happy about being connected to George Soros. Like, why?
Well, because if you say George Soros, you're an anti-Semite,
right?
You know that upside down triangle chart says so,
right?
Know?
So therefore, if you're actually tied to George Soros, it's okay because someone declared that George Soros is an anti-Semitic buzzword. Like, it doesn't even make any sense. Like, George Soros is a real billionaire who was heavily involved in overthrowing the Soviet Union and the countries of the Eastern Bloc, and he personally enriched himself quite a bit by doing so, by manipulating currencies. He's not a good guy, and he's real. But anytime we mention him, they just say, "Oh, that's anti-Semitic," as if he doesn't exist, right? And then on top of that, you know, they passingly mention him, and people getting funded by him like it's no big deal. When I mean, it's one of the weirdest things. They have this weird double thing: does he exist or not? Is everyone who
Yeah.
ever mentions his name discredited or not? Like, make up your minds. Very weird.
Well, if you side with him, it's fine.
Yeah, exactly.
Right,
That's
exactly.
the thing.
You're
Like, if
You're
you're
against him, you're an
exactly.
anti-Semite.
Yeah.
But the problem is that like they conflate the discussion of George Soros being involved in countless color revolutions to the point where like you can find a recent clip of him talking at some conference where he brags about creating the Soros empire in. And I'm not joking about that. That's the exact thing that he said. That is not me making a thing up. But he said that in reference to him more or less helping to topple the government of a ton of Eastern Bloc states. And that isn't even a vaguely controversial thing to say. That if you go to the Open Society Foundation's page, it's more or less a list of bragging about which countries he's toppled the government in, like since the late 1970s, if I remember right.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, I think the thing that they do too with George Soros is that they've tied it so much to being like a right-wing conspiracy theory that anytime you bring up his name, you're a right winger. And that's like what they do throughout this video is that every time you bring something up, it's tied to the right wing. There's no such thing as like being, talking about these things on the left or as a communist or a Marxist or Marxist-Leninist is anytime you bring these things up, nope, you have to immediately be associated with the right wing. And that I think
you're in the basket of deplorables.
Yeah,
Right,
and what were the actual results of what Soros did? He funneled money to dissidents tied to and directed by American intelligence. He's a Hungarian billionaire. He funneled money to these forces that brought down the Soviet Union. And the result of overthrowing the Soviet Union was the bringing in of neoliberal, free market, shock therapy economics, which resulted in a mass wave of death, a huge rise in human and sex trafficking, a huge inflow of drugs, people starving on the streets. I quote, the shock doctrine by Naomi Klein talks about how, the population of Russia went down by roughly 10% during those years, probably, not just to people dying, but people leaving the country. Economist Andre Gunder Frank called it economic genocide. I mean, people were literally dying and starving in the streets because they dismantled a socialist economy. They had 20 to 30% unemployment. They were selling off state assets to the highest bidder. And if we ever bring it up, we're anti-Semitic, and they can associate with this literal mass murderer. They can associate with him, and it's just a joke, right? And it's like it's not even a scandal, right? They're trying to debunk that Abigail Thorne is getting funded by these other people, but the fact that she's tied to this literal mass murderer who's responsible for the death of like millions of people in Eastern Europe, who's been declared by various governments in Hungary and China to be a criminal. I mean, for the fact that he brought down the economies of countries, destroyed people's lives, and enriched himself by doing so, by manipulating currencies. This person who, yes, I mean, is he the sinister controller of all things? No. Is he the only liberal billionaire? No. But he's not a good dude. He's not a good dude at all. But being associated with him is just considered to be, whatever. It's a joke. It's funny. And if we ever mention him, that means we're Nazis, which, I mean, and that's just the recurring theme throughout all of this.
That's the argument I always get when I talk about something George Soros has provably done. Somebody always says, well, there's a bunch of other billionaires. Why don't you concentrate on them? And it's like, well, it's because George Soros did something very specific in the Eastern Bloc countries with his money. And he did it with cooperation from the US government, the CIA, NED. You said, like, there's, I mean, documented proof of all these things and his actions. While certainly he's not the only person who has been involved in this type of a thing ever, he's certainly the one individual who has been cumulatively involved with many more of these and has funded them, directed them, etc. It's something that you have to take on. Like, the further up the ladder you go, the less people are involved.
Yeah.
Sure. And it's even more important, I would say, for leftists and communists to talk about him, because the right tries to say that he's a communist, which he's not. He is.
I was going to say that.
Yeah.
He's the one who's leftists in particular should be concerned with George Soros, because he's the one who gets his hands into all the like whatever is considered leftist, the Black Lives Matter or whatever. He's involved in all these things that are supposedly very progressive and leftist,
and you're representing his interests when you're participating in something that is funded by him, or any billionaire or any nonprofit that is tied to capital, or any government program. You have to understand, when you take money from these things, you're ultimately representing those interests.
Indeed. And
Even
now,
when you're not taking money too.
yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes, especially when you're not taking money.
And that there is, when we talk about the synthetic left, we talk about the woke left, the current, that's being promoted by U.S. imperialism and by CNN, that speaks in the name of leftist ideals, but is actually serving imperialism. That's pretty darn important to talk about. And it's important because average working class people hate that. And if they think that is communism, they're going to, be obviously turned off by anything socialist or Marxist or leftist, right? So if anything, it's very, very important for people on the left to talk about it and be clear. This guy is not a communist. He's not a Marxist. He's an agent of U.S. imperialism and capitalism who has blood on his hands, and he's manipulating left-wing circles in order to make them serve imperialism. Like, this is a really important thing to talk about. And if you just shout anti-Semite at anyone who brings it up, I mean, you're obscuring things. And again, the manipulation of the left and the infiltration and manipulation of the left is well documented. I mean, these are facts. And throughout the video, we talk about facts. She points to facts that we talk about, and she says they're not true because they sound like something else, or just trust her. And so this next bit, I guess we'll play this next bit, is about she apparently thinks the Congress for Cultural Freedom program of the CIA didn't exist, never existed. Here's her talking about that.
Yes, Caleb, you're just like Lenin. You're just like Mao Zedong. Everyone is very proud of you, and you're definitely a real communist.
Yes. Unironically, yes.
Here too, Maupin says that anyone who's saying that he said that BreadTube is CIA is taking his words uncharitably, and at this point it's just absurd. This is the conspiracy left's own conspiracy theory, to prove how they're cool and normal, and everyone who opposes them is a fake liar. Everyone's getting in on it. Maupin may as well just own what he said and be proud of his invention. But hold up a sweet, tender, loving minute there, bucko. Is this an original conspiracy theory? Let's investigate.
In the chapter, What and Who is BreadTube, Maupin lists all the content creators he thinks are involved. But then, he also talks about someone called Dr. Steve Hassan, who Maupin says has friends on the inside, and is
definitely not a part of the BreadTube universe, but certainly lurks in the background of discussions about, quote, deprogramming.
Okay, this is promising. We have some kind of sinister, shadowy figure pulling all the strings from behind the scenes. So who is this? I've never heard of this person before. Steve Hassan is a pop psychologist and cult researcher whose main contribution to cult research, the BITE model, has been debunked by more serious cult researchers. But he called Trump's following a cult, so that's probably why Caleb doesn't like him. Just like with Grayzone's Syria PsyOps veteran, Dr. Hassan has next to nothing to do with BreadTube. Actually, he thinks that trans people are a cult, and he tweeted about how hypnoporn is brainwashing to trick people into transing their gender, which would probably make it pretty hard for him to engage with the majority of BreadTube at all. So I don't really understand what reason Caleb has for bringing him up here. Oh, except maybe that Dr. Hassan was raised Jewish, and every time Caleb Maupin points a finger, there is a Jewish person on the other end. Okay, let's see what Caleb actually uses as evidence that this kind of manipulation...
Let's pause it here, because I guess I started a little earlier than I intended to. Yeah, first
Come
of all,
on.
Yeah, Dr. Steve Hassan. Now, there's some interesting background here. So on a stream with Thought Slime, Sophie was reading from my book, RedTube Serves Imperialism. And on that stream, she actually bragged that she is in contact with Steve Hassan, that she's been talking to Steve Hassan, and that she's hoping that she can convince him to sue me for slander, which he can't do because nothing I said in there is not widely documented and factual. And then people on her stream pointed out that Steve Hassan is anti-trans. So this is her trying to cover up for the fact that she's collaborating with a known transphobe just because she hates me. And this is hilarious. So
I did want to say I thought that she had transed her gender, and I think that might have been a problem for Hassan.
Yeah, and Hassan's ties to BreadTube are documented. He and Caleb Kane and Faraday Speaks are very close. He gave Caleb Kane ex-cult therapy or whatever. They did a stream together. And Steve Hassan also appeared on CNN calling for the mass deprogramming of Trump supporters after January 6th. and the clips are widely circulated. And also, from what I understand, I have received some inside tips about his relationship with ContraPoints and some others. So he is definitely lurking in the background. And the quote says, "I said he's not part of BreadTube. He's not a BreadTuber, but he's definitely lurking in the background and advising them." That's all I said. That wasn't the clip I intended to show. But there you go. Go ahead. Anyone else want to comment on that before we get to the Congress for Cultural Freedom part?
I think there's an exaggeration here on the part of just making the assumption that when you say that somebody is connected and perhaps has some degree of influence over a sphere, that you're calling them like a shadowy figure with their hands on the strings for all the marionettes. And it's like, that's not really what you're saying in the book. You're saying that there is somebody who's specifically connected to these people who does have some degree of influence over them, and that also has ties to various organizations, both governmental and nonprofit, that have an interest against communism, have an interest against basically any kind of material analysis. Like his interest, obviously, just from even like he has a book and he's an author point of view. The idea that everybody who's bad is just in a cult, like he has an interest in pushing that point. And it seems to me that that's just that's just Sophie sort of saying that because you have noted somebody could have influence, that you're saying that there is a conspiracy here. And that's not really the case.
Yeah, and so I guess, Fox, do you want to say anything about that before we go on to the part about the Congress for Cultural Freedom?
No, you can move on.
All right. Yeah, well, this was the part I meant to show.
Could be taking place.
There's a historical precedent for this called the Congress for Cultural Freedom. During the 1950s, the CIA had a program for covertly funding left-wing voices, artists, intellectuals, and others. They set up a magazine called Partisan Review in the United States. They set up a magazine called Encounter in Britain, and in Germany they had a magazine called Der Monat. That's where the Frankfurt School received a lot of its funding. And
oh my God! It was cultural Marxism the whole time! You only have to Google CIA Frankfurt School to see it. This is this cultural Marxism conspiracy theory from the LaRouche movement, which Caleb is part of. Holy shit! Okay, shit. Lyndon LaRouche, American politician.
All right.
There's so much wrong
apparently.
It's just you say a word, and that makes you bad. That's the long and short of it.
I like the first thing too.
I mean, I guess, I have here, this is a book called Finks by Joel Whitney, How the CIA Tricked the World's Best Writers. This book, apparently published by a major publisher, this book is a complete fraud because Sophie said so. So throw that out. Right. We've also got this best-selling book, Chaos, Charles Manson, the CIA and the Secret History of the 60s, all about funding and manipulation of left-wing activism back in the 1960s and Congress for Cultural Freedom, all of that. This is also a complete fraud, even though it's put out by a major publisher and all of that.
That was recently a best-selling book too, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. And we've got John D. Marks, The Search for the Manchurian Candidate, the CIA and Mind Control, all about the CIA's programs, manipulating leftists, promoting drugs in left-wing spaces. But this is all a complete fraud. Oh, and we've got Edgar Sheen, his book Coercive Persuasion, all about how to influence communists and manipulate them, and all the studies the CIA did about what motivates people to be communists and how can we manipulate them. This is also a complete fraud. We've got Robert J. Lifton, the mentor of Steve Hassan, and his book Losing Reality, and about how fanatics can be manipulated and all this. All of this.
Wait. Are you saying that you take information from somebody who pulled the strings of Dr. Steve Hassan himself?
Yeah, I mean, it's like
guilty.
The cultural freedom is a fact. Okay, it is one of the most widely admitted and widely celebrated programs of the U.S. intelligence agencies. But according to Sophie, it's not real. It never happened.
You can look at their favorite source, which is Wikipedia. There's a Wikipedia entry on the Congress for Cultural Freedom.
Yeah, I have it right here. Actually, I wanted to make sure people understood that
Wikipedia. They're spreading anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, this is
and the Wikipedia article even says that the CIA was the ones who are primarily involved in setting it up and funding it and all that.
Yeah.
I mean.
I mean, but apparently it never happened. And why did it never happen? Because it sounds like something someone else said, right? It's the cultural Marxism conspiracy theory, which no, it is not. Right? The cultural Marxism.
I would have to say we're all kind of like sympathetic towards Marxism, are we not?
Yeah, and the cultural Marxism theory, that's an idea put forward by the Nazis that communists were trying. It was back in the 1930s, cultural Bolshevism, that communists had infiltrated, the movies and the theater milieu and were trying to like destroy the good morals of Western civilization or something. That's not what we're saying at all. We're saying that in the 1950s, the CIA had a specific program of trying to influence leftist voices, artists, intellectuals, activists to be anti-communist and against the Soviet Union, against China. And that's a well-documented fact. And we're not saying there was a plot to undermine the morals of Western civilization. That's not what we're saying. We're not saying it has anything to do with Jews. We're not talking about any of that. What we're saying is that actual Marxism has been covertly attacked by CIA funding of the synthetic left. And this is a documented fact. And, but because it sounds like something else that has nothing to do with what we're saying, she's refuted it. I mean, I don't know. I mean, and all these books, all this research, the CIA's website, actually, there's an article you can find on the CIA's website bragging about the CIA.
It used to be pretty like, it didn't used to be really prominent on the website too until they did the upgrade of the update of their look.
No, but I mean, it all just doesn't exist because Sophie said so. I mean, and that settles it.
Hashtag Sophie said so.
Yeah. So there you go. Any other thoughts?
Hashtag Sophie said so.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah. And she does this again in the video, this bluff where she takes a true thing and she says that it's just, there's no evidence of that because she said so. And the example that I wanted to point to of her doing that is the bio labs, right? So let's play that, right? These bio labs, she says this is all just an evil conspiracy theory, never happened.
For some good reasons and some bad ones, and Alex Jones and the conspiracy left all cater toward them. And to that end, Jones has been sharing a conspiracy theory popular in Russia and China that there are bioweapon development labs in Ukraine, which are funded by the West, which Putin wants to seize. And by extension, possibly because those labs are where they manufactured the coronavirus. And the conspiracy left are sharing the same theory. Maupin is sharing it. Peter Coffin is retweeting Maupin sharing it. One one of the few Maupinist disciples, is sharing it. George Galloway produced a whole segment talking about it. On the American right, of course, it's much more popular to talk about the possibility of coronavirus being manufactured, but among the conspiracy left, their main focus of this story is the possibility of, and this is their term, not mine, weapons of mass destruction in Ukraine.
Yeah. So, first of all, she doesn't get that the fact that Ukraine was developing biological weapons with which to attack Russia would obviously make Russia's intervention in Ukraine a lot more logical and defensible. She doesn't quite comprehend that, right?
No.
But the other thing that she doesn't do is apparently it's not only you, me, Peter, Fox, George Galloway, other people that are promoting this conspiracy theory. There are actually members of Congress and State Department employees that are promoting this conspiracy theory. Someone she forgot to attack.
Let me ask you, does Ukraine have chemical or biological weapons?
Ukraine has biological research facilities, which, in fact, we are now quite concerned Russian forces may be seeking to gain control of. So we are working with the Ukrainians on how they can prevent any of those research materials from falling into the hands of Russian forces should they approach.
Now, we know what happened, and Sophie has done a great job. Vladimir Putin hired actors who looked a lot like Marco Rubio and Undersecretary Victoria Nuland. He set up a sound stage in Moscow, and they filmed the whole thing to make Americans think that the U.S. government was working with the military of
Green
Ukraine
screen.
and built these biolabs, all to justify the fact that he just wants to murder Ukrainians. That's what happened. Sophie has uncovered this vast Russian plot to undermine our faith in NATO. Wow. I mean, look at the clip. It's in the clip. It's right there. Go ahead, Peter.
And then you can also see it's very interesting what she does there. Like the narrative before some of this stuff started to actually get proven was that there were no labs. And now the narrative, the State Department representative putting the narrative out there is saying, oh, there's labs. But the primary worry we have is that Russia might get a hold of them.
Yeah, and there's also a framing thing that she does that's really misleading too, where she says, oh, weapons of mass destruction, that was the manufactured consent for the US to go into, the Middle East. And she's saying that the Russians are now doing the same thing, where it's like, no, they didn't go in there because they were looking for weapons of mass destruction. They went in there for, to denazify and these other reasons. And then they happen to find these things. It's not like they're using that the same way that the U.S. did to manufacture consent to go into the Middle East. I mean, it's very dishonest framing here.
Right. I mean, it's like, so you have to imagine that, like in Mexico, the U.S. Imagine that Russia overthrew the government of Mexico, started arming gangs of Nazis whose mission is to kill Americans in Mexico. Started bombing and killing, people, U.S. citizens or people that were like linked to the United States in Mexico, killed 14,000 of them. And then the icing on the cake is that then Russia were setting up biological weapons labs facilities with this hostile government. At that point, the United States would have to intervene. I mean, what Russia is doing makes perfect sense. It's very logical if you put everything in context. And that's why the U.S. media doesn't want to talk about it. They just want to show you, clips of people dying, and they just want you to cry and get emotional about it. Well, we obviously are very upset about the people suffering in Ukraine, and we feel for them. But there's more going on here than just, Russia is just being aggressive. This is started by the United States and by NATO, and they have kept this going. They've been arming Nazis. They've killed 14,000 people in the eastern regions. They're now involved in this weapons program. We're saying some pretty legitimate things, but she thinks the whole thing is just completely a hoax. And if these aren't biological weapons labs, why are they also worried about the Russians getting their hands on them?
Well, because obviously it Russia bad. Like that's really all it is.
Right. And why is the Pentagon funding them? And that's another question. Why is the Pentagon involved in funding them? Pentagon is a military entity, is it not? I mean, it's just like it's shocking but apparently these biolabs, they're not real because she said so. Just like I think the Congress for Cultural Freedom is not real because she said so.
I think a good framework for looking at her video is anything that counters mainstream media is considered a conspiracy theory. And when you think of it that way, it's like, okay, that is like the underlying message here, is that whatever is not mainstream media, okay, that's a conspiracy theory because it's not mainstream. It's not the approved message. Okay, then there must be a conspiracy, and therefore we shouldn't believe it.
Yeah. That's
one thing I think
that. Yeah.
One thing I think that it's particularly interesting is how, because Alex Jones says something that's in like the area of what we're saying, that it automatically means we're saying exactly the same thing as Alex Jones. And what it really is that like people like Alex Jones and the various, I don't know, people that you would put into that category. I mean, from Alex Jones all the way up to even Tucker Carlson on Fox, for instance. They all are able to notice when something is wrong. However, their worldview or the worldview they're paid to push is just radically different than what we would say once we begin analyzing these situations. It's like saying because a right-winger said the minimum wage is too low, that means it's a right-wing talking point. And anybody who says the minimum wage is too low is a right-winger. Now, that's obviously not what happens, but that is ostensibly it's team sports. That's really what they're putting forward here.
Right.
And they don't care to analyze the argument at all.
And it leads to the left being defenders of the status quo, right? Because the right is going to criticize the status quo, but their answers about what to do about it are going to be very different from ours. They're going to say privatize everything, free markets, I mean, they're going to try to, bring us back to the 1800s, which isn't the solution, but they're going to point to problems. And so our job on the left, we're not allowed to point to problems. We're just supposed to blindly defend whatever the status quo is doing. And that's what BreadTube has basically become. The establishment in the United States is under attack from the right. And so how dare we try to bring criticism from the left? That's a crime. Instead, we're just supposed to be defending the establishment from the right and saying everything's okay and that all critics are secretly Nazis. I mean, that's basically what the left, that's what our job is, according to Sophie.
Nothing to add to that. That's exactly it.
Now, Fox, you had wanted to talk about the part where she talks about Hannah Arendt. So maybe I'll pull that one up next. Let me just get to the time code here.
Yeah, I think that's pretty relevant to the previous point. So
yeah, what's funny is like that ties in with the Congress for Cultural Freedom, and then her confusing it with cultural Marxism. And then, what's funny is you came on our podcast last year, and I had edited that into a video where I sort of took clips from all the different podcast guests and turned it into a video about Marxism and energy. And you had a really great clip about how talking about what the Congress for Cultural Freedom was, how it was not the cultural Marxism of the right winger, the right winger idea. And then how these ideas were pushed by people like Hannah Arendt.
And actually, we will play that clip before we play Sophie. Why don't we do that? Actually, I forgot that we had that clip.
I think that it would be good to play that one because it shows that you didn't even have to address the argument here to say that. You've just been saying that.
Yeah. This is a clip of me on your podcast from earlier.
So part of how the left changes is just about the circumstances, but you have to then add to that conscious manipulation, right? Which is also a factor because starting in 1949, the CIA launched a program called the Congress for Cultural Freedom and started funneling money to anti-communist leftists. Generally, the people that made up the Congress for Cultural Freedom were followers of the Trotskyite Max Shachtman. And Shachtman, after World War II, his followers, one of them being Irving Kristol, who is the father of neoconservatism, started working for the CIA. And Irving Kristol was actually the director of the CIA's Congress for Cultural Freedom program, where they started covertly giving money to leftists in order to put out an anti-Soviet message. And the magazine Partisan Review, which was purported to be a communist socialist magazine, and it was all over the college campuses. Every campus you went to, you could find Partisan Review. And it was this subversive communist magazine, except it like every issue was devoted to exposing the Stalinists, much like in the way, people get gone after now. They would wage campaigns against one artist or intellectual who was aligned with the communists and people to boycott their performances. And a lot of what was done in Partisan Review magazine was equating the Soviets with the Nazis, right? And saying that it's basically the same system. And direct CIA payments to pay for their operations were supplemented by the Ford Foundation and the Rockefeller think tanks and other things. And various left-wing academics were getting subsidized by getting paid lots of money to have their articles appear in this magazine that was everywhere. And this was the conscious manipulation. And you talk about the Frankfurt School and the rise of this new, and it's weird because on the right, they have this whole thing about cultural Marxism. Right. Well, what they're missing is that a lot of these cultural critics that really emphasized Gramsci really downplayed the idea of class struggle. Emphasized. You had Herbert Marcuse, who said that the working class was not revolutionary; it'd be the intellectuals who were the revolutionaries. All of this was being covertly supported as a way to kind of direct intellectuals and leftists away from Marxism. And in the process, they changed really the nature of what leftism was. The anti-populism came out. Susan Sontag is a really important voice in this milieu. And so Hannah Arendt also comes out of this. And anti-populism, the idea that average people are the enemy, that average people are dangerous, and if they ever get together and start fighting for their rights, that's basically the same as Nazi Germany. That became a big theme in what it meant to be a leftist, this kind of intellectual nonconformity.
All right. Yeah, that was great.
I like that.
What was the name of the Fox?
I just want to say before it's on the wall. It's on the wall in those photos. The Congress for Cultural Freedom. They're arguing that this thing isn't real, but there's photos of them with a sign that says the Congress for Cultural Freedom.
No, it's not real, Peter. Don't be a conspiracy
Sorry,
theorist.
I'm sorry to
Yeah.
to interrupt, but I just think that's the funniest thing in the world.
All those magazines that we showed and all of that is just a complete hoax, according to Sophie. I mean, but what is the name of that documentary, that film that you put up on your channel, Fox?
It's called Marxism and Energy.
Yeah, people should check that out, by the way. It's a great piece with a lot of very good information on these kind of topics. People should really check out Marxism and Energy. Very well made film, very well put together.
Thank you.
Very good stuff. So this is, I guess we'll show now Sophie, and Hannah Arendt's ties to the Congress for Cultural Freedom are like very obvious. She was published in Partisan Review. They promoted her. Her book Eichmann in Jerusalem was like widely promoted by these entities. But anyway, this is Sophie talking about it. And this is her understanding of this concept. And Fox wanted specifically to react to it. So here we go.
As he misrepresents Arendt, Maupin is showing that he understands what she means, right? The banality of evil is so horrifying to Arendt exactly because ordinary people did carry out not only the Holocaust, but every little bit of the Nazi regime, and every inhuman and vile thing that human beings have ever done to one another. The complete revelation of the face of evil, the ability to gaze into the eyes of the architect of genocide and see a real human person with internal thoughts and dreams, is exactly what's so scary about the Holocaust, because ordinary people did turn in their neighbors, their colleagues, their fellow human beings to the Nazi extermination machine. And Caleb is incensed by this observation, because he believes in the sanctity and purity and supremacy of something that he calls ordinary working class people. This is exactly why Caleb Maupin is so slippery. He says things like, I'll never disavow other anti-imperialists, and I'll never disavow other anti-imperialists is exactly how a fascist, using the aesthetics of leftism, signals to other people who aren't welcome among the left because they're bigoted or insensitive or support genocidal regimes, that they have a safe place with him. I would say that, though coded, what Maupin says there about Arendt amounts to soft Holocaust denial, which shouldn't be too surprising given the company he keeps, and the fact that Maupin is an anti-Semite, trying hard but not doing well at hiding it.
All right, so there you go, right? Me criticizing the way Hannah Arendt talked about the Holocaust is the same as saying the Holocaust didn't happen. There you go.
If you don't like Hitler so much, you shouldn't have two of his mustache above your eyebrows.
Oh my God.
Why are you replicating his mustache above your eyes?
Oh wow.
Wow, that was savage, Peter. I liked it.
Yeah.
I'm looking at this and I'm just like, you're lying to our faces. What the hell? How are you okay with what you're saying? How are you reading things and going, all right, well, I'm going to put this together this way. I'm going to say that criticizing Hannah Arendt is denying the Holocaust. I'm going to say that framing this a certain way to criticize that is to say that the Holocaust didn't happen. When in fact, like, I'm sorry, but everybody present right now has said more about the actual Nazis in the world right now than any of these people who have, by the way, defended them. I'm referring, of course, to the officially integrated neo-Nazi battalions in the Ukraine National Guard. Like, that is absolutely disgusting what she said there. That pisses me the hell off.
Well,
I mean,
it's so funny because the ordinary people thing, right? Is that this is like the crux of like where leftism was switched, right? From the CIA literally used these intellectuals to sort of turn leftism against ordinary people. And that is like the legacy of Hannah Arendt. And that is why George Soros loves Hannah Arendt. So like Bard College is like within 5 miles of my house. I've lived there. I've lived within 5 miles of Bard College for 15 years now. It is, I call it a douchebag factory because it just pushes out like the worst, like ultra woke leftist types. But anyways, so Hannah Arendt is like, George Soros loves Hannah Arendt. They have like a whole Hannah Arendt center at Bard. He has given them like $500 million. and she's literally buried there. Hannah Arendt is literally buried there. And she, like Caleb, you've brought up this book many times, how she used this book to sort of equate communism with fascism by saying it's the this is like the idea is like it's the tyranny of the masses. But as communists, this is what we love the people. That is like what defines us, is that our love of the people, and that the people know what's best. And it's the ruling to say that it's the people who caused the Holocaust is insane, and it's like upsetting, and it's no, it's the ruling class was the cause of the Holocaust, not ordinary people. And it's
it takes the onus off of the big capitalists who were
exactly
like Ford Motor Company, like IBM that designed the punch card machine that kept track of the concentration camp inmates. Right? I mean, all kinds
Hugo Boss, who designed their fucking uniforms.
Yeah, I mean, it's like there's many wealthy capitalist corporations that are involved in the Holocaust, but Sophie says we can't talk about them, but we should just focus on how deep down average ordinary people are all Nazis. And the thing is, the scientific Marxist understanding of fascism explains the Holocaust, explains the 1930s, World War II very, very well. There's that book by R. Palm Dutt that I have widely recommended, Fascism and Social Revolution, which is that under capitalism, you have a situation where the capitalists are constantly trying to, maximize their profits, involve as few workers as possible in the process of production, reduce the role of workers, but then they can't sell the products that they produce because workers are also consumers. And if you drive down everyone's wages, you eliminate jobs, pretty soon no one can buy the products. And so then the capitalists get into this mindset that the way to solve their problem of overproduction is with mass destruction and driving down living standards, degrowth, right? And the Nazis were all about degrowth, right? That's what they were about. And that the Nazis started talking about useless eaters. And the first people they exterminated were disabled people because they said, oh, they're a waste. They're eating too much. They're consuming too much. That, we need to reduce consumption. And the more that you look into the actual mindset of fascism, you can find the degrowth narratives. You can find the sick admiration for like primitive, paganism and trying to go back to, back to nature and back to times before technology. All the stuff that these synthetic left people believe that is not left wing or progressive in any way, but is part of their weird counterculture, hippie, apocalypse fantasy or whatever, is very Nazi. Right. And it all fits the economics that those of us who understand historical and dialectical materialism can understand. And Hannah Arendt was specifically subsidized by the Congress for Cultural Freedom because she made it about how just deep down human beings are evil and need to be managed and controlled, because if they get together and start fighting for their rights and rallying around popular leaders, no matter who that popular leader is, no matter what they say, it's always the same as the Nazis. And that is a toxic narrative. And I will call that out. And how in the world is calling out that narrative that blames the Holocaust on the working class and takes the onus off of the big capitalists? How is that denying the Holocaust? I mean, this is ridiculous, but that's how they operate.
Well, I mean, look at how they frame regular people. The way regular people are even brought into the conversation here is that they turned in Jews during the Holocaust. It's not like the whole construction of how this was even said was just engineered in such a way where the mere mention of regular people is meant to cause disgust in the audience. And I think that is it's obvious, but at the same time, like, to this audience who is trained to sort of enjoy this content, they're like, that's right, anyone can put anyone into jail, and that's bad. They all hate everyone. They secretly have hate in their hearts, all regular people. And it's just like, no, this is not how people are. People want what's best for both themselves, their family, the people around them, their neighborhood. They don't hate by nature. The thing that people hate is just not being able to get by. And as we said a few minutes ago, when we talked about how the right often notices that something is wrong and supplies a narrative that feeds people into various, in some cases, you can even go full on and say the Nazis did this. They supplied a narrative that was genocidal. And that is exactly how they got a lot of these. I mean, it's not to say that people weren't anti-Semitic in Germany. There was certainly plenty of anti-Semitism, but they were capitalizing on that. And also, capitalizing on the fact that a lot of people were hurting. So you sort of mix those two things together. There's a lot going on, and it's not regular people are bad. It's capitalists are telling us, they're dictating reality to us, and that's the problem.
Oh, totally. You're totally right about that. And I mean, it's kind of horrifying to see that. And the other thing that I thought was interesting is her reason that we should hate ordinary working class people and blame them, not the people controlling society, not the capitalist owners of the means of production, is because they turn in other people. What is all of BreadTube basically doing at this point?
Yeah, right.
Video. It's just labeling people thought criminals. And inciting mobs.
That's what this video is.
I mean, so I think there's a lot of projection because most ordinary people aren't bread tubers. Just saying.
I mean, certainly it's not on the level of turning in Jews to Nazis.
Yeah,
but like the dynamic is similar here in terms of not necessarily breadth, but mechanically what they're doing. They're just pointing at people to call bad and to show themselves as good. And that's, I mean, at its core, exactly what was going on in Germany as well at the time.
Exactly. So, and that seems to be all they do is they go around finding people who have strayed from the prevailing narrative and declaring them bad and inciting people to go after them, distorting their arguments. I mean, they are just professional cancel culture people. And they try to inflict harm on people who go against the prevailing narrative. And they try to incite violence against them. They try to prevent them from getting jobs. That's basically what they're doing. And yet that's why we're supposed to hate ordinary people. Ordinary people don't do this. Ordinary people hate this kind of stuff. Ordinary people are sick of the cancel culture. They don't want to see their neighbors, have their lives destroyed because of a bad tweet. But that's what these people are doing. So that in itself is just, I mean, sheer hypocrisy there. But what else do we got? What other sections do we want to show? Do you want to say anything, Fox?
No, that was good. That was a good section to bring up.
Okay, now we got a couple other sections we can show. I think we did want, I guess when Peter gets back on, we did want to talk about the origins of BreadTube because she has a very strange history of Peter Coffin that doesn't match reality. Right. But I guess we can talk about Ukraine too, because this is important stuff, actually, about the origins of Ukraine, where she's just distorting my words, just completely distorting my words, and saying I say things that I don't say, which is just, I mean, it's somewhat important. So yeah, we'll talk about here her reacting to me basically laying out Vladimir Putin's speech. Stalin was Georgian.
Insists Putin's obvious anti-communism is actually a huge win for communists.
And it wasn't a communist speech, per se, but the speech said a lot of things that a communist could agree with.
Claims that the USSR invented Ukraine.
Putin remarked, he said, it's so funny that these people that are Ukrainian nationalists are constantly talking about decommunization. Because there wouldn't be a Ukraine if it weren't for communism. Lenin, the guy who created modern Ukraine, they're tearing down all the statues to him. They're tearing down all the statues to Lenin. And they're tearing down all the statues to Stalin. And they're tearing down all the Soviet memorials. And again, there would not be a modern Ukraine if it weren't for the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union designed it. And he said, so these people really want to decommunize. Maybe we will. And he was hinting at the fact that, if these people really, really want to completely decommunize, then they'll be absorbed back into Russia. And what Putin argued in his speech is that belief that all nations have the right to national liberation, he took it a bit too far.
Oh, and my favorite, for absolutely no reason, Maupin stops himself from saying that Lenin was Russian to speculate about Lenin's possible Jewish ancestry.
Because Lenin was a Russian. And Lenin was a Russian. He had some Jewish heritage, but he was ethnically Russian.
Lenin was Russian. Well, a bit Jewish, but he was still Russian. He claims that the Ukrainian people didn't even have written language before the USSR.
And giving them their own, and these people, they wouldn't even have their own, a lot of them wouldn't have their own written language if it wasn't for the Bolsheviks.
And that Stalin built all their infrastructure and power plants. Look.
Now, Okay, so I'm saying a series of things that are completely true. The borders of modern Ukraine were drawn by the Soviet Union and expanded by the Soviet Union. And that's a historical fact. And it was the 5-year economic plans of Stalin, who was not Russian, who was a Georgian, that industrialized modern Ukraine. Ukraine has running water and electricity. They actually built the world's largest power plant at that time. The Dnieper Dam was built by the Soviet Union. These are facts. And what I'm pointing to is what Putin was saying in his speech, which is that the Bolsheviks were obsessed with the idea of national liberation. And they made a big point of promoting the written Ukrainian language, even though the majority of people living in Ukraine speak Russian in their households. In the Soviet schools, they taught the Ukrainian written language because they were promoting the language of oppressed nationalities. That's the whole point. And that the Bolsheviks worked really, really hard to build up the Ukrainian nation. That's what Putin said. That's what I was saying. That's a fact. That is well documented. And that the irony of these Ukrainian nationalists being so anti-communist is that again, it was the Bolsheviks who worked really, really hard because they saw the Ukrainian people as an oppressed nation under the Tsar, to give them their own territory, to promote their language, and then the industrialization, etc. There's nothing I said there that is not factual, right? And pointing out, she has me before that, she has making fun of me saying that Stalin wasn't Russian. That's an important point, that Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union, the second major leader of the Soviet Union, was not of Russian heritage, right?
Yeah.
The notion that the Soviet Union was the Russian Empire recreated. No, there was a guy from Georgia who was the leader of it, right? And that the Bolsheviks had this policy of promoting oppressed nationalities. And Putin argues that policy, that they went too far with it, and that created the seeds of division among the peoples of that region. And I don't know if Putin's 100% right about that or what. I'm just explaining what Putin said.
Yeah, you're just saying this is what Putin said, because not everybody speaks Russian, for instance.
And I mean, is it not a fact that the Soviet Union worked hard to promote written language, and that the Ukrainian language, many of the people in Ukraine wouldn't have been able to even speak the Ukrainian or write the Ukrainian written language if the Soviet Union hadn't promoted it the way they did? Is it not a fact?
Maybe Russia did a little bit too much centering of Ukraine and uplifting their voices.
Yeah.
I was going to make that joke.
I mean, this doesn't fit the narrative that we're getting right now, that Ukraine has always just been oppressed by the evil Russians. That doesn't fit the narrative. So she's just basically saying he said these things, not explaining what I'm actually saying, and not pointing out that they are actually true, and just saying it just doesn't fit the CNN narrative that Russia has always just hated Ukraine and is trying to oppress Ukraine. And so therefore I'm a bad person. And it's like, there's historical facts here, that are somewhat relevant, I would think. But there you go.
Well, the thing that's important is it's not even that, like, what she's saying is that you're basically saying that Russia is the originator of the Ukrainian language, the Ukrainian written word. That's what she's saying. You're saying, and that's obviously not what you're saying. You're saying more or less like it's something that would have gotten lost had the USSR not worked in the way that they worked to again center Ukrainian voices.
Yeah, and but I guess that doesn't fit the narrative we're getting on CNN, so we should stay away from it.
If there's like Sophie fans or BreadTube fans hate watching this right now, do yourself a favor, just listen to Caleb talk in context. You'll actually learn a lot, like if you like cherry pick, it's like all they do is cherry pick, and they're like, see, he's bad. And
the indigenous people the indigenous people of Ukraine were they were centered, their voices were uplifted, they got to tell their story. That is, of course, social justice. I mean, the indigenous people of Ukraine, they got their land acknowledgement, they got their language uplifted. I mean, I don't know what their problem is here.
The problem is it doesn't fit the prevailing narrative, that we're supposed to believe that Russia is just done nothing but oppress Ukrainians, and now the Azov battalion are heroes as they torture people. Have you seen the torture that's going on against POWs?
Yeah, we actually have been trying to avoid that. Like it's coming up so much on our feeds now. Like it's literally because they're torturing people, and they're doing it like out in the public during broad daylight, and it's wild. And you have people who are professing themselves to be the anti-fascists supporting this. They're saying like, no, there's no Nazis in Ukraine, or they're marginal voices in the Ukraine, the Ukraine National Guard. That is false. Like, they're officially integrated into the Ukrainian National Guard. That is if any single Nazi, like literal neo-Nazi in the United States, were open about their beliefs and officially integrated into the United States government, we would never hear about anything else from these people.
Yeah.
And yet, when it's in like this state that is like specifically beneficial for the US and NATO imperial agenda, it's fine. It's okay. The Nazis are fine.
All of a sudden, the America KKKists don't give a shit about Nazis. They're like, a few Nazis are fine.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyhow, Peter Coffin, there's a section where she like went over your history with BreadTube, and it was wildly inaccurate. So we wanted to play that.
Like complimentary. It was like not that. It was like a lot nicer than I. She was like, "Oh, Peter was a good friend."
So shall we play that clip then?
Sure. Yeah.
Nah,
It's funded by the Queen, BreadTube is CIA, but we still need a bit more history before we can really get into it.
The rise of BreadTube wasn't entirely copacetic, of course. As with any social group, there were people who became infamous with the core community for being a bit of a shithead. Real heads remember the guy who called himself an anarchist but publicly defended chattel slavery.
One such figure in the early days of the BreadTube community was Peter Coffin, a former comedy YouTuber and Bernie bro who, like many people, had moved further left during and following the 2016 election. Peter was producing video essays mainly focusing on the attention economy and social capital, concepts popular among situationist Marxists like Guy Debord. Most people involved in early BreadTube, myself included, interacted extensively with Peter, or even called them a friend, because Peter was very excited about and centered themselves in trying to organize the project of BreadTube to raise class consciousness via the internet. However, through a series of public outrages and toxic fallouts with other creators, Peter essentially fell out the bottom of the community. First working with the most notable creators, then burning bridges and calling them all liberals, then making connections with newer, growing creators in the space, then burning bridges and calling them all liberals, and then eventually blocking the entire community, but continuing to talk about them from behind the block and calling us all liberals.
I'm sorry, but you need to read this. Call it BoJack to avoid tripping the censors.
Now Peter is a minor player in the conspiracy left, using their platform to promote BoJack, The Great Reset, and other popular conspiracy left narratives.
All right, Peter, what in the world is she talking about there? And like, what's the deal?
Well, for one, this is the funniest part about this, like, when BreadTube was first starting, and yes, I very much was into Bernie Sanders, but that's an irrelevant point here. What she's really talking about are the social dynamics of what's going on. There were larger creators, and I was considered to be that because I was getting a lot of views because I came in from doing comedy. I wasn't, a political YouTuber my entire life. I had I guess career before that. But I decided to give up what is ultimately a thing that's actually pretty easy to make it in, which is, comedy. Like all people like that. And I moved into something that is a little harder to do that in because I like just talking. I do like trying to be funny, and I still try to do that. But I like to be talking about the world. Anyway, as such, I was a kind of quote unquote bigger voice at the start of that because I got into it because, again, I was a Bernie Sanders person and I considered the left to be a viable option on the internet. I relentlessly promoted smaller people because one of the primary complaints smaller people had of quote unquote BreadTube was that there wasn't a lot of communication from the bigger voices, and that smaller voices were often marginalized, not promoted, not listened to, etc. I made it a point not to do that. Like, I cared about like all of the supposed principles that we're talking about, where the littlest person gets a voice. I think that that's important still. I just what I have found is that what that really was a means to sort of careerize it, to bring it into a space that Anybody could walk into and start making videos and have an audience that they can tap into. Because, you know, you would have somebody like myself or somebody else who had made it in the area who would tweet it. The original three, like bigger people, H-Bomb, Philosophy Tube, ContraPoints, didn't do a lot of that. And also, I myself, along with those people, are white. So there was a big controversy about how BreadTube's so white. I took it upon myself to attempt to alleviate that by putting together a little informal organization attempting to identify people who might be good at making content and not from that traditionally like white middle class background. I was looking for folks who, people of color who are from, regular working families, regular working places. And I attempted to work with that. Unfortunately, there's a tyranny of structurelessness problem that comes in that got ballooned to way beyond its scope by people who came in and got involved. But the point is, that was my attitude going in. And what I have learned from that is that you do have to have some discretion about who you promote. You do actually have to gatekeep a little bit. Like they use this argument of like, oh, you're just gatekeeping. You're gatekeeping to try to keep people from looking into smaller voices and figuring out what they're actually about and really like caring about like a history of their content or, a trend in their content. It's just like, look at the last video, see if they said the right words. And if they did, you better promote them. Otherwise, you're a greedy grifter. Hi.
That was your sin, Peter, was that you did care, was that like you were trying to play by their rules and you were like, okay, I will help people. And none, like, they have these rules on purpose because it's like a speed bump. It's a roadblock to like get people to get lost in the sauce and not focus on the larger picture and say, oh no, you have to worry about the most marginalized and you have to use your privilege to uplift others and this and that. And you like took them at their word for that. And I recognize it because I've done it too in like real life organizing, is that like you take people at their word and you say, yeah, I want to marginalized people are treated unfairly and we should, but we make the mistake that it falls on us, that it's our responsibility to correct the ills of capitalism. And what we always have to go back to is that like, no, it's the economic mode, it's the system, and that we can't do it by like our individual choices or whatever. We have to like come together to fight that as a class together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one thing, there's a couple places in here where she just gets some facts blatantly wrong. I mean, if she would just learn to use Wikipedia, she could make much better videos, because it's like,
what's funny,
she uses Wikipedia a little too much, I think.
Yeah. But go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, but doesn't know how to. It's like she uses it, but just clearly like browses like with some intense bias in terms of what she's willing to take in or use.
Yeah. So yeah, at one point she brings up our recent conference in Austin, Texas, which was awesome, by the way. And I'm really pumped. We're going to do it again.
It was fantastic.
Yeah. Well, this is her bringing up our conference in Texas. And she says a couple things here that are amusing.
Far right. They're organizing. They're getting together. They're meeting up in real life and they're holding rallies. The CPI, or Center for Political Innovation, is Caleb Maupin's organization, which, as far as I can tell, is called the CPI, sometimes styled as the CPI USA, to just riff on the branding of the CPUSA, because Caleb conceptualizes himself as a modern LaRouche, splitting from the Communist Party of the USA and trying to steal their membership.
Point of information, Lyndon LaRouche was never part of the Communist Party USA. He was a Trotskyite at one point. He was So I mean, again, embarrassing factual error. Number one. Number two, the Communist Party USA, mainly what they do is campaign for Democrats at this point. And
yeah, like why would we want to be that?
Yeah, we're a think tank, not a party. So yeah, I don't know. The other thing though is you'll notice she showed the two people holding the flag, right? Well, one of those is a trans person, an open trans person, right? Which it should be noted, but she doesn't ever show the crowd because there were many non-white people in the crowd. There was we're editing. There's the speech of the young Muslim man who spoke.
That was fantastic, by the way. I remember when we were talking about going back over it. That was the thing that I brought up is what really sort of surprised me is like the best kind of most energetic and a really important speech.
Yeah, and I mean, this narrative that we are some kind of a white supremacist or white nationalist or Nazi organization is very thoroughly refuted if you actually watch or read anything the CPI publishes. And actually, there's a member of the Center for Political Innovation who really wants to debate Sophie from Mars. And her name is Lily Goldklang. She is openly trans, and she's from a Jewish background. And she wants to debate Sophie from Mars, and she is continuing to harass Sophie. So I hope that Sophie will give in and just debate Lily, because Lily will destroy her. I mean, she just absolutely will.
Lily is so friggin' like, I wish that I was where Lily was at Lily's age.
Yeah.
That's something that I think about on basically every time I think about Lily or I'm reminded of the CPI conference, because she is one of the brightest people I have met at that age. Like, if only I understood half of what she understands now at that age.
Yeah, she is super impressive. I hung out with her once in person. She is a super impressive young person. I always think the same thing. I'm in my 30s. I'm like, oh God, I'm so far behind. These kids are like,
yeah, it took me this long.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, I mean, it's like the Center for Political Innovation. We have all kinds of material where we talk about the history of the United States. We talk about the need to overcome the legacy of racism and discrimination, about unifying the working class around a class struggle program, anti-fascism. Our opening pledge actually has, to eliminate all traces of fascism from the earth. It's about unifying people. Like, there's nothing remotely fascistic about what the Center for Political Innovation is doing. But it must be fascist because we're not the prevailing left, and everyone who doesn't just rally behind the Democrats is therefore a right winger, and therefore working, therefore a Nazi. I mean, there's a level of stupidity with these folks that is kind of shocking. I mean, we had a conference with, LGBT speakers. We had a conference with people of color speaking. We had a conference that began with an anti-racist pledge. We had a conference where we talked about anti-imperialism. We talked about the history of the Communist Party and fighting racism. But all of that is just an elaborate ruse to cover up for the fact that we're actually, the modern day Ku Klux Klan or something. This is ridiculous. I mean, how do these people, they live in an alternate reality. Anyone who watches my material for a few seconds or reads CPI material is going to realize that this is malarkey. I mean, and it's just like, they just depend on their audience. And that's what I thought about the video overall, right? I guess there's one more little bit I did want to show, but overall, like, no one is going to be convinced by this video if they're not already part of the cult, right?
Yeah.
No one who thinks about biolabs is going to watch this and go, oh, no one who knows anything about Congress for Cultural Freedom is going to go, oh, like there's no convincing here. This is just kind of rallying up the people that are already part of the liberal mob and telling them who to hate. That's really the only purpose this video served.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
There's a lot of like reading of intentions and everything too. Oh, they want to do this because of this. Like she can magically like read everyone's mind and their intentions behind everything.
Yeah.
Which is a key critique of conspiracy theories, mind you. That's conspiracy theories. Yes. Right? That's one of the main critiques of conspiracy theories is they assign motive in cases where it's not necessarily there. I mean, for example, one thing that many conspiracy theorists will talk about was the attack on the USS Liberty, right? During I think it was the 1967 war, Israel attacked a U.S. ship, the USS Liberty, right? And there were some U.S. sailors who were killed and such. And we don't know why, right? And the official story from Israel is that it was an accident, and we don't know why. But there's all kinds of people who say, oh, well, Israel was doing this because they were trying to start World War III. We don't know that. And Israel was doing it because blah, 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 blah. We don't know that. And that's one of the main critiques of conspiracy narratives is it says they are doing this because you don't know that. A lot of people do things for all kinds of different reasons, not realizing the implications. And that in a lot of cases, conspiracy narratives, they give people too much credit. You know, they assume that people realize what the results of their actions will be. Which a lot of times they don't, right? And it's like they kind of, they make it seem like there are these nefarious actors that sit there and do things and know exactly what
like
will
a
happen as a result of
mastermind.
them.
Yeah.
And they won't. And that's one of the critiques, right? In a lot of these Alex Jonesy kind of narratives, the problem with them is that they, you know, there is no hope, right? The secret controllers, everything is their plan, everything is under their dominion, and we're all just, you know, being led toward the dark ages. When in reality, the situation that the globe is facing is there isn't control. Capitalism and the rule of profits is not under their control. And we are facing a crisis of the anarchy of production. They can't control their own system. And as a result, it's facing a long-term economic crisis. If they could control their system, things would be working out a lot better. They can't control it. That is the problem. There are factions among the ruling class battling for power, etc. But they ultimately don't have the control, and they don't have the intention. They don't have the ability to say, well, we're going to do this and this will make this happen. So, I mean, again, there is a very fair critique of what you can call conspiracy narratives, most of which come from the right, don't come from us. We're putting forward, you know, legit critiques of Western capitalism. But there is a, you know, and she's playing into one of the primary things, you know, I mean, that, you know, every time I say that I'm not going to denounce people that are anti-imperialist, even if I disagree with them, that's all a nefarious plot by me to signal to Nazis that they're welcome in my movement. Well, Nazis are not anti-imperialist. The Nazis right now are one of the main fighting forces in Ukraine. You know, if you listen to any Nazi material, it's all loaded with anti-communism. They hate communism. They hate all the communist countries, and they link communism to Jews, and communism is all just a Jewish conspiracy, blah, 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 blah. They're against the civil rights movement. You read any Nazi material, those folks are not anti-imperialist in any conceivable way. But me saying that I won't disavow people who are anti-imperialist is somehow me nefariously plotting, right, to come up with a way to tell Nazis who might watch my video about Libya that I'm their guy. Like, this is ridiculous. She's assigning me a huge amount of intention, right? I'm sitting there and it's like I'm really plotting. I mean, I don't have that many hours in the day to come up with these elaborate plots, but there you go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, and you know, in addition to the factual error about LaRouche, there's another factual error in here that I also find to be amusing. So we'll pull that one up. Right. All right.
The army, when they saw which side was
go slightly back
direction, I would have him raise.
Right. Okay.
Reminds me that Caleb went to that Nazbol conference with the founder of the Nazbol party. The original Nazbols were people from the Tsarist army in the Russian Civil War who defected to the Red Army when they saw which side was winning and convinced themselves they could support communism as the next great era of Russian glory.
What? What? Huh? That didn't happen. I mean, again, no. Wikipedia. You know, the National Bolshevik Party. What? I mean, I that's one I've never heard before, right? You know, I mean, the National Bolshevik Party was started in Russia in the 90s, right? Dugin was part of it. It was founded by Edward Limonov, the punk rock novelist. He got kicked out of it, right? The National Bolsheviks, in some of their documents, they traced their lineage back to a split from the German Communist Party in the 30s that argued that the German Communist Party was too harshly critical of German nationalism and said that basically because Germany had been stripped of its colonies after World War I, it was an oppressed nation. But I've never heard this, that there were soldiers in the Tsar's army who defected, and that's where the National Bolshevik Party of Dugin in the 90s started? Like, did she just make this up?
Well, you see, Alexander Dugin is actually a century old.
Ah, okay. He was in the Tsar's army in 1917.
Yeah, he was literally, he was carrying a bayonet with like, it wasn't even like an automatic rifle. Like, it's just old-fashioned stuff. And that's why he looks like that. And he also hates modernity.
And that's why he is the guy who told Lyndon LaRouche to split the Communist Party. I mean,
yes,
I mean, this is like
he was there.
Right, yeah. I mean, this is silly. I mean, this is just
time traveling
silliness.
It's like the movie it's like Forrest Gump, where Alexander Dugin is actually in all of these various events.
Right. I mean, and it's like, again, like I didn't speak at a NASBOL conference because the NASBOL party was dissolved in 2007. So it'd be very hard for me to speak at a conference of a party that doesn't exist. I spoke at a conference called Alternatives to Globalization that took place in 2018, and Dugin was there and I was there. And that is the only time in my life I've ever met Alexander Dugin. So, you know, again, they've made NASBOL a meme, right? They've just made it into a meme, right? You know, Dugin was in the Russian Communist Party after the fall of the Soviet Union. He actually wrote their constitution. And then he went with Edward Limonov to form the National Bolshevik Party. He was kicked out of the National Bolshevik Party. The National Bolshevik Party was outlawed. Dugin runs something called Eurasian Institute. So, or Eurasian, what is it? Eurasian Institute, Eurasian Mission, Eurasian something, Eurasian.
You're obviously very familiar with it.
Yeah, right. Well, you know, I mean, it's like, it's weird. It's like I met somebody one time, therefore I'm responsible for everything they've ever said. And then if you read his stuff, he doesn't talk about Israel. He doesn't talk about Jews. He's not, you know, I mean, he's into this like kind of weird Russian national conservatism stuff. Like, he's not a Nazi. He's a strange Russian conservative thinker who's very influential. You know, so it's like, again, like trying to say I'm anti-Semitic because I talked to somebody who's not anti-Semitic. And I mean, this is, wow. I mean, it's like so many leaps here. And then again, it's like, you know, Wikipedia, my dear, like, you know, my dear Sophie, like LaRouche was never in the Communist Party. The Tsar's army did not produce National Bolsheviks. Like, where is she getting this stuff? I mean, it's really poorly done.
Well, I too know what it is like to have met a person one time and be innately tied to them forever in the form of Steve Harvey. Sophie actually tweeted earlier today out that video to try to discredit me.
Oh boy. You went on a TV game show.
Yeah. I went on a TV show that was fun, and people laughed at and with me. It was great. I enjoyed the hell out of it. If I could go talk to Steve Harvey again, I would. If I could go, I did in a video last year. I kicked myself in the nuts again. It's Jackass Forever is a highly popular movie. Like, people, normal people, like it when people don't take themselves super seriously, like seriously enough to do that to their eyebrows.
Oh man.
Oh man, yeah. No, I really hope this debate between Lily and Sophie from Mars happens. I feel like it won't, unfortunately.
It won't.
I think that it probably won't, but
Sophie
I would love it.
Depends so much on all of her arguments basically center on completely distorting what the other person is saying and lying about it. To actually have the other person there and say, well, no, that's not what I'm saying, would just destroy them. I mean, they would just completely fall apart. Right.
Well, yeah, it's like TMZ. Like, do you see TMZ interview the people they lie about? No. And the reason for that is because they're maintaining a fiction that you're buying into because it's interesting. That's really all she's doing here. She's attempting to make content that she knows is interesting to a certain quadrant of people. And that's it. Like, she is, I don't know whether she views herself as doing this, but what she's doing is making a living off of a fandom that she tapped into.
Yeah. Well, there's a section that I wanted. I'm not going to play, but I just thought it was interesting to touch on because, I mean, if you watch, there's a certain section where it's very clear that this video, you know, Sophie sucks up to Skippy the Bear Thought Slime. She sucks up to him, and he gives her a little bit of play every so often. And it's very clear that this video was like requested. I mean, she was trying to impress the great Thought Slime by making this piece, and there were parts of it that like, you know, it's like, again. My critique of Thought Slime is if you watch his content, he is the most depressing, cynical person you've ever seen. Like, his content is just completely, you know, it's like there is no hope in the world. A lot of stuff about mental health and tearing people down. It's called slime, you know, and just it's everything gross and insulting people. And it's rooted in this kind of pessimistic, hopeless way of doing things. And I've critiqued that because I want to lift up my audience. I want to empower my audience. I want them to feel stronger. You know, and I've given a fair critique of that. Plus, Thought Slime decided, for whatever reason, I don't know, to claim that my father is a Wall Street banker, which my father is many things. He is not a Wall Street banker. I'm not going to say
Isn't that kind of anti-Semitic to claim?
It is right. It is right. I mean, but my father, it's not that hard to find out who my dad is. All right, it'll take like a couple Google searches, maybe one Google search, you can figure it out. And he's not a Wall Street banker, but this keeps going. Every time Surfs makes a video, there's like 10 comments underneath it. Caleb's dad's a Wall Street banker. What a hypocrite! Like, it's like my dad's not a Wall Street banker. That's just not factually accurate. But regardless, right? So in my book, RedTube Serves Imperialism, I did dig up that something that he talks about on his streams is that he talks about a lot of the hardship that he's experienced in life, and that his mother is a white collar criminal. And that's actually true, is the difference, right? It's actually true. And people who live in glass houses should not throw stones, right? If talking about people's family is not permitted and all of that, why is it a crime for me to bring it up, right? Again, if you're going to spread all over the internet that my father is a Wall Street banker when he's not, why can I not bring up something that's true about your family? Like, why is that considered?
That frankly, he's talked about it on stream.
Yeah,
publicly.
So it wasn't that. Again, it was a Google search that told me. It's not like I doxed them. I didn't like post the home address or something like that. It's a fact that he talks about on his streams all the time in his, depressing, hopeless, the world is hopeless. And it's really, it's like, with Thought Slime, you see somebody who has a lot of mental health problems preying on an audience full of people who have even worse mental health problems, right? And not helping them feel better, but instead, just playing up their resentments, playing up their pessimism, their cynicism. It's really demented. I feel like, content creators have a responsibility to raise people up, to empower people. And the BreadTubers don't do that. The fact that they made a whole video just about these are people who are bad, who are all Nazis because they disagree. It's like, that's where they're at. They're not trying to improve things. They're not trying to improve the world. They're trying to just kind of sling mud. They live in this world of mud, and they just want to sling mud at people. And that's what they're all about. And it's really kind of gross. And so apparently, Sophie made this video in the hopes that the great Thought Slime would promote it. I guess he read some of the voice quotes or whatever. That's what's going on here. But do we have any other reactions? Any other thoughts about this video overall? I've played all the clips from it that we really want to play. But what other thoughts?
Well, I think it's ultimately it is a projection of their own insecurities onto us. And when they can't say that you're transphobic and they can't say that you're an anti-Semite, it's because you're a grifter and you want social capital. And that's what it really, I think, because that's what it boils down to for these guys, is that we were looking at the comments between Bad Empanada left a comment on her video saying that well, these guys don't matter, what they're never going to get anywhere, why do you even care? And she's like, no, I think that we need to focus on this because it's a problem, which is interesting, right? Are we a problem or are we not? And we're a problem only if they think that like we're cutting into like their audience or something. Like that's what, otherwise what is the problem? Who are we a problem for? We don't go after them. We're making this video in response to them.
Yeah, they claim that I'm obsessed with, like they said, I blocked everybody and then continued talking about them from behind the block. The reason for that is because they continued talking about me after I blocked them. Like it's that simple. Like people were like, hey, Sean and H-Bomb, they're saying things about you, even though you've blocked them. They're even referencing that you've blocked them. It's like, well, what do you think that I'm doing? I'm just like out of nowhere inventing a reason to talk about these. Like my day-to-day involves raising kids and doing work for, a job. But the Bad Empanada comment also has this really interesting, what? Yeah. And my partner, this Bad Empanada comment also has in it a sort of indictment of how they see us. Bad Empanada says they may hate Bill Gates, but they don't hate him for his ownership of capital. They hate him for the idea that he's a bad capital owner. The bourgeoisie can be good The bourgeoisie can still be good. He's just a bad one who wants to turn the world into communism. Buy the My Pillow guy's special QAnon pillows 50% off. He's a good bourgeoisie. And it's like, that is the most ridiculous lie. It's such a lie. Like, it's just spinning crap out of thin air, as Marx referenced Malthus in the Theories of Surplus Value. That's what they're doing here. Like, I consider the My Pillow guy to be one of the most pathetic figures in the bourgeoisie. Like,
sometimes
he's constantly
they take our arguments and then they say, "Oh no, we're saying that." Like, what?
Yeah. And the thing is, I don't hate Bill Gates, like specifically the individual Bill Gates. I hate the fact that he has ownership of capital. I like exclusive ownership of capital. I hate that there's not capital going around. I hate that there is not abundance for all. I also hate that about the My Pillow guy, who again is a pathetic individual who's always going around like, they call us Caleb orbiters. This guy is a Trump orbiter. He is just constantly showing up at things and talking about how great Trump is. That's just an obvious, like, I don't even know if I've mentioned the My Pillow guy on Twitter before, and I certainly haven't in my content. I just don't care about him. I think he's a pathetic figure.
It's like they don't see the world in terms of like there's a system where profits are in command and that's causing all these problems, and instead the means of production should be rationally organized to serve public good. They see the world in this kind of good people and bad people mode. You know what I'm saying? Where it's like, in their mind, it's like, well, Bill Gates is bad because capitalists are bad by nature, and so is My Pillow guy because he's bad, and we're good, and so we're going to prove how good we are on the internet. It's like they don't understand Marxism, and that's why a lot of them don't advocate eliminating the system of profits and command. They just want a worker co-op or something, right? They don't get that these problems are rooted in the system where production is organized for profit, and we don't have rational planning of the economy. I think in one of Thought Slime's videos, he actually said that Lenin had personally invented the idea of a planned economy and called it democratic centralism. Again, Google, my friend, democratic centralism.
A planned economy being democratic. I haven't heard this one.
Yeah. That's in his video that he made. He made a video called like PragerU Doesn't Understand Democracy. And he actually says that socialists have never advocated a planned economy, but Lenin invented it, and it's called democratic centralism. And it's like, no, that's not what democratic centralism is.
I mean, that's not even kind of what democratic centralism.
Yeah,
and it has nothing to do with the economy. It's an organizing principle.
Yeah, these people have no idea what they are even talking about. And that's, the other thing is they're so triggered by our conference, right? When was their conference? These people have a way bigger audience than we do, right? A way bigger audience than we do.
Yeah.
Yeah, if they were actually trying to organize like an independent working class organization, they could do it, but they don't. Instead, they organize a defense of the Democratic Party from the right wing. That's all they do, right?
Because there wasn't any grass in the conference for you guys to touch.
Yeah.
Well, I think the next one we're gonna have plenty of grass, so you should come too, Fox.
Yeah.
I know. I gotta get out there.
That'll be awesome. All right. Well, is there any other final thoughts before we wrap this up?
No, it's just that they hate regular people. Like that's ultimately, you talked about how they don't want to lift up their audience. Like, it's evident in the fact that I was even the only content creator that was really trying to push like smaller creators. Like, it's just that like they don't know what the regular person is capable of. And unless they've proven that they have some degree of access or wealth, they clearly aren't to be trusted. Like, unless they have demonstrated their quote unquote merit, and I'm using that term very loosely because it's bullshit. They'll even make videos about how it's bullshit, but that's how they see this one way or the other, whether they know it or not. This is just another example of how if you do anything for the regular person, and when I say the regular person, I don't mean white people, I mean the working class, which constitutes a multiracial, multigender, multi-ethnic, multi-everything, diverse group of people. When you're advocating for them, you're a problem somehow. When you're talking about class and trans issues, for instance, you're a transphobe. When you're talking about class and racial issues, you're a racist. You can't bring these things up when they contradict the system that these people have become used to and embedded in to some extent, because again, they're advocating for resistance or rebellion, but they're doing it in a way that is, as you said, Caleb, not organizing people, not bringing them in, not giving them touch points to go from, not trying to bring in any energy or any labor power or anything like that. They are simply pushing themselves. That's all.
Yeah. Yep. And we aspire to get out of the movement to the masses, actually build organizations that can improve the lives of working people. And so we're in a completely different ballpark than they are. I mean, they're producing this kind of internet soap opera about good people and bad people and shaming people and discovering the secret Nazis and how every right winger and every dissident leftist is secretly part of a Nazi cabal that's made once great American capitalism sinister. And we're doing something completely different. So the fact that they can't quite understand what we're doing, I don't quite blame them for that, but I wish they would just kind of get out of our way. You know, that would be nice. If they would just kind of say, all right, they're doing their thing. We'll continue making our, pessimistic, hopeless, weird internet videos. Let them do their thing. That would be nice. Instead of inciting people against us and trying to harm people, it'd be nice if they just left us alone. Let us do their thing. You fight your way, I fight mine. But I guess that's not something we should expect. And in fact, the more effective we get, the bigger our conferences get, the more people that join the CPI, the more these people are going to come after us, the more they're going to just blatantly make things up. And, and that's just what we have to deal with. So there you go. There you go. All right. Shall we wrap it up?
Sure.
All right. It's been fun. Thank you, Fox. Thank you, Peter Coffin. It's been great.
you.
It was a great stream. I can't wait to hear the next Space Commune podcast and the next PACD podcast. And good things are happening. Stay strong, everybody. Good night.
Night.